My name is Sandra Olson, and I'm the minister of the First Church of Christ of New Haven, or Center Church on the Green, as it is called. And I would like to welcome you here and hope that you will be inspired by what is truly an inspiring story, and I think a real spiritual as well as a personal victory. And I am going to start by introducing our first person, Isa Mujahid, and he's going to introduce another speaker. And so thank you for taking the time out of what is probably a busy afternoon to lend your support to some very, very major issues. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Isa Mujahid. I'm the field organizer for the ACLU of Connecticut, and I wanted to thank you all. I just want to take a couple minutes first to thank our hosts, the Center Church on the Green, for allowing us to have this event here. I want to thank our sponsors, the ACLU of Connecticut, our chapters, Greater New Haven chapter, Yale chapter, Southeast Connecticut chapter, and Fairfield County chapter. I also want to thank the Yale Undergraduate Prison Project for sponsoring, and the Black Student Alliance at Yale. And of course, I want to thank our speaker, Mr. Robert King, for coming up from Austin and spending a few days with us. He also spoke at a Civil Liberties Conference yesterday and has another event lined up. I'm going to call Barbara Fair to introduce our speaker. Before I do so, I just want to let you know, after our discussion today, well, Mr. King will speak, and then I'll come and help moderate the Q&A. And then after that, there is a book signing. Mr. King's autobiography is at the back table. So I want to call Barbara Fair, an ACLU of Greater New Haven chapter member and a longtime activist here in New Haven.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everyone who came out today for this very exciting event. My name is Barbara Fair. I'm a founder of an organization, grassroots in New Haven, called My Brother's Keeper, and we do a lot of work around criminal justice and prison reform. I'm also a member of ACLU, which I'm very proud. And I'm so excited about having Mr. King here today and having the opportunity to tell his story. Mr. King is a former Black Panther who was sentenced to prison by our government. He served 31 years? He served 31 years in prison, 29 of them were in solitary confinement. And one of the issues that we're trying to fight now on a national level is solitary confinement because of the psychological damage that it does to a human being. It is torture, and we can find other nice words to say about what we're doing, but it's torture, and we do it every day in prisons around this whole nation. So Mr. King survived all of that, and he's here today to tell his story. This is a story about the resiliency, the human resiliency, and the human spirit, and how someone can overcome all of this torture and still be looking as good as he does today, going around the country telling his story. I remember when I first met Mr. King years ago, after hearing his story, and I said to him, "How did you stay sane?" And he said to me, I don't know if you remember, he said, "Who said I'm sane?" And so yesterday, he got me again when he said that I'm free of Angola, but Angola's not free of me. And so that is his commitment, that he's going to make sure that he lets the whole world know, if he can, about what goes on in our prisons. So I want to thank you again, and I want to introduce Mr. King to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Without ado, I get into it. The thanks and accolades have been made, and I replicate those. Thank you again. Many thanks. You all came out. Some of you heard my story. Some of you perhaps read about it. But I need to say this, that it's kind of hard for me to tell my story without alluding to and telling the story of others. And others, by others I mean not just the other two members of the Angola 3, now 2, but there are so many other prisoners around the country, and especially in Louisiana proper, who are in the same dire straits that we were in, but just was not fortunate enough to probably tell his story or to get it out into the public and to get garner the support in which we have been able to do over the years. But my story began, I say in 1970 in my book. I point out that I was the year in which I was born, but my birth year, but I also point out that I think 1970 was truly my year of birth, because 1970 was the year in which I was arrested and erroneously charged in a crime, and they offered me some years, and I refused to take those years. And I was brought to trial, and despite the fact that there weren't any physical evidence that linked me to the robbery, it was a robbery of some proprietor, some supermarket, I think, or grocery store. And they came to me and offered me a 15-year sentence. I want you to know that I'm no angel. I wasn't an angel at the time. I had been to prison. I had pled guilty to an armed robbery in which 2 people had committed, and all the evidence showed that 2 people had committed, but 4 people were sentenced for this robbery. I was given a 10-year sentence. I was threatened with the fact that if I didn't know, we were at that time threatened with the fact that, and we all were all trouble youth. We had all been to the state reformatory. And we were told that if we were arrested together, there was 5 of us arrested, and like I said, 2 people had allegedly committed the crime, but 5 was arrested, 1 was cut loose that night, and we all were sent to the precinct where we were subsequently kept, and subsequently we were appointed state lawyers because neither one of us had any funds or resource to obtain an attorney. And the attorney assured us that if we went to trial at the time, robbery was 30 years. Of course, since that time, it has quadrupled, especially if you're a second time. It went up to 60 years, then 99 years, and now it's 198 if you have a subsequent sentence. I was a youngster at the time, perhaps 17 years old, not much more than 17. And 10 years looked much more than 30 years. And knowing the system, understanding the system, the way it was, and then being in prison, being on a flat with people who had knowledge of how the system worked. There was a fellow by the name of, I call his name Cockalinder, that's his nickname. They had offered him a 10-year sentence, and he refused it, and he instead elected to go to trial, and he went to trial, and he was found guilty, and they gave him 30 years. And that scared the devil out of me. When they came with 10, hearing this story about this guy being offered 2/3 less, we decided to get together and say, look, we're gonna have to cop out for this. Of course, only 2 people committed the crime, but for some reason they wanted 4 people. We were all young black teenagers at the time, and it was customary, you know. The New Orleans police, by the way, I'm born and raised in New Orleans in the South. Of course, it don't make no difference. I mean, it replicates itself anywhere, north, south, east, or west. Some of the same thing happened, but it was much more blatant at that time. And anyway, we decided to plead guilty because if we would have went to trial, we understood this from experience that the jury automatically, which was all white jury at the time, this was in the 60s, which was all white, they were friends of the prosecution. And without a doubt, we knew and understood that if we did not plead guilty, we would be given the lengthier sentence and probably would never get out of prison. And so one was offered 7.5 years, and he took that, and we decided to take the 10 years. So 4 young teenagers were convicted of a crime in which only 2 people had been involved with. And, oh, by the way, if you want to know whether or not the person, the perpetrator of the crime, was I one of the perpetrators? No. In fact, the individual who was robbed strictly said he didn't have anything to do with it. Neither did he. But nevertheless, it was the duty of the police to solve crime because they felt if we did not do that crime, we did something else. And so it was at that time that we elected to go. Fast forward again to 1970. I was arrested. After having had that experience, I ended up doing actually on that first dose, about 8 years or so, or more, maybe 10 or 9. I'm not quite sure. I have to do the math again, but it seemed like it was nearly all of it. Anyway, after I elected to go to trial. To accept this 10 years, and ended up in prison. But then, 1970, it came back to hunt me, and having a previous record, a pattern, a system. I think people, for some reason, judge you by patterns, which to me is not quite accurate, but that's another story. Anyway, I decided not to take this. They appointed me a lawyer. They appointed all of us lawyers. We didn't have any money or resources for lawyers. They appointed us a lawyer, and the lawyer came to us and told us about the offer. The DA said that if, at least I was offered, the DA said that if I would have pleaded guilty to a sentence of 15 years, I had a record, and I would not likely get 60 years, because by this time I think Robert had went up to 60 years. And I looked at him, and after having spent and all those years in prison, I said, no way. By this time I was out in the street. I had married, had a son on the way, and had a job, and I was doing some boxing. I thought at one time I was going to be the middleweight champ of the world. I see. All right. I did, and I did head boxing. I worked at an auto body and paint shop. I worked, and I was trying to, to subscribe to the system. I mean, I was, born in the system. I'm not politically aware at this time. Of course, I understood and saw all the discrepancies that were going on. But I could not define or articulate this. I thought it was the way things were and the way things were supposed to be. Maybe not the way things were supposed to be, because later on I began to realize that, no, things are not supposed to be like this. But at this time I thought things were supposed to be like this. And so, but when they offered me this second dose of 15 years, I said, no way. So they got sort of angry with me, and they decided to bring me to trial. And I was glad to go to trial because I knew nobody could not say that I had done anything. In fact, the perpetrator, according to the victim at that time, was a dark-skinned African-American man, no scars, no tattoos, no marks, no anything, was about 42 to 45 years old, and said that this was the perpetrator. And I was wondering, how in the world could I get arrested? Because I didn't look anything like the perpetrator. But nevertheless, I went to trial, elected to go to trial, and what happened was the police coerced the witness into saying that I had a prior record and that I probably had done it and whatever. And this individual made an in-court identification in front of a jury, in spite of the fact that her previous description of the perpetrator did not remotely resemble me. But the point is, the impression was made on the jury that And of course with the inquiry of the district attorney who mentioned that this scared lady here, this poor lady, by the way, this lady was married and had a child. But to the jury that was all white, the district attorney appealed to this and saying that this young lady was frightened. Here's some guy coming in here and standing 2 or 3 feet from her with a gun and saying that, give me the money or whatever it was that was said according to him. And she was frightened, so she made a mistake in the identification, in the initial identification. A jury believed her and found me guilty, and I was subsequently given a 35-year sentence. It was at that time, and this was in 1970, it was at that time that I became angry. I began to revisit my thoughts about the system. I looked at the system, and I just wondered why things were like they were. But at the time, again, I was not politically aware or politically active, for that matter. I was just a little rebel. Rebel with maybe a cause, but I did not have a conscience, a political consciousness. And, but anyway, I ended up getting 35 years, and I got angry. And I decided to do a thing that I felt necessary to do. I took the right that only a slave had. A slave, I began to, without being able to articulate it, I began to ruminate and think about it. And hearing about slavery, it dawned on me that I should take this right. The only rights that a slave had was a right to rebel. You don't have a legal right if you're a slave. Then as the years went on, I want you to know that I kind of perfected this thought because I made the equation that just because something is legal does not mean that it's morally and wholly correct. I deduced and thought about slavery. Chattel slavery was something that was legal. But morally, it was wrong, and it wasn't until people began to see and spell out the immorality of slavery that people saw it as being reprehensible. And I saw the system that alleges the abolishment of slavery, that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. And then when I read the words, I'm going to say slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist on these shores unless a person who has been duly convicted of a crime, it dawned on me, wait a minute, something is wrong with that. There is an exception. To say that slavery was abolished is to err. It is the wrong thing. Slavery, for some people, was never abolished, and especially at this time, but now it hasn't been abolished for anybody because the prisons are filled with everybody now near, all colors, all genders, and so forth and so on. But basically, it was at this time, you know, I looked at that and I made that equation that slavery still existed. And that's the reason why I took the moral right to rebel. And I felt justified. Nobody got hurt. I made plans, and people were talking about, you know, having a lawyer to file a habeas corpus. Well, I filed a habeas corpus. And yeah, I filed a habeas corpus. It wasn't a habeas corpus, it was a habeas corpus. I was successful for a minute, but they recaptured me, and it was short-lived. And I ended up, they actually charged me with aggravated escape, despite the fact that no one was, well, if getting out of prison aggravates your keeper, well, I aggravated them because I made it out. I got out of prison, and not only did I get out, I brought 12 others with me. And they were angry with me. But that is what I did. I brought 12 more people with me. Many of them was arrested that same night. However, I wasn't arrested on the same night. I was out a minute. And about a week or so later, not much more than that, I was rearrested. Someone recognized me, and they saw me, I imagine, in the neighborhood. I wasn't hiding. Of course, I wanted to get out, but I also felt that sometimes you could find in open, you could also find seclusion. You could hide, and you could be a thing where if they know you were hiding, it probably would be more detrimental to you, more quicker for capture. And so I wasn't hiding, but someone recognized me, and they called the police, and the police came to where I was, and they rearrested me. And for the aggravation that I caused them, I went to trial, and they gave me 8 years for aggravated escape. And I have to say this to you. Every chance I got to aggravate them, I did. It just so happened I was not successful, but I did my best to aggravate them. They placed us in the federal detention from the New Orleans Parish Prison. I was held in the New Orleans Parish Prison. They sent me to the Annex, which was the federal prisoner where they had state and federal prisoners there. In fact, it was a luncheon center for Vietnam. They had a lot of vets who were coming through there. People were leaving from that, going to the army and so forth. And those who were leaving from the army, they also, the one who gone AWOL, they also brought them there. And so we witnessed a lot of the guys who were fighting the war in Vietnam for things and so forth and so on, and how these people were really the ones who were going AWOL, how they were becoming very conscious about things. They were saying, we asked them, why would you go AWOL? Blah, 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 and so forth. Now, I wish I could have went to the army, to tell the truth, but at this time, I still wasn't politically aware. But then I began to learn from some of these brothers that they would go to Vietnam and fight a war to make it well and right for other people to live in comfort. And when they came back to America, they could not go to certain places. They could not be equal in no way or form or fashion. And these things began to register on me. And then not long afterwards, I was sent back to the New Orleans Parish Prison. And I was being held on the 5th floor. By the way, the 5th floor was a holding cell. There were only about 5 or 6 cells. And formerly, it was a place where they used to hang people before they started executing people. They took the electric chair and went and brought it to Angola, but there was a 5th floor, there was a drop. And everything, the noose, you still see the noose hanging during that time where in the hole in the floor where the body would drop once they cut them loose. And they placed me on that tier. And they had 3 or 4 other people on that tier. It didn't hold but about 5, maybe 6 people. And I looked one day, I heard one day, because there was a television that was in the hallway. The cell that we were in was lined up, and there was mesh wire, thick mesh wire on the cells. And there was a television, a small television, but it was for the guard. We could hear it, but we really couldn't see it through the mesh wire. And then it was catacomb. It was turned a certain way to make sure that we couldn't see it. And there was an interruption in the regular programming. And the newscaster came on and said that there was a group of militants shooting it out with the police in the night ward in the housing project. And that caught my attention. I said, what? Because I really didn't know. And then they mentioned that this was a group calling itself the NCCF, which meant at that time, and still is, the National Committee to Combat Fascism. And then later on, they say, well, these were members, offshoot, they were members of the Black Panther Party. And I looked at the scene, and I was checking that out, and I am telling you, I'm being honest. I almost wish and hope that I would have been in that house. But the point is, they was not shooting it out with the police. What was happening was there was a shoot-in by the police. They had been down, and I didn't even know the Black Panthers. I found out that they were members of the Black Panther Party, and I didn't even know that the Black Panther Party was in New Orleans. I had heard about them casually, but I learned later on that they had came to New Orleans sometime in December 1969, and that they were, in one of the housing projects, and they found out who they were, and then the put them out of there, and they went on down in a night ward. And it was there that the shootout was taking place. I learned some things about, the party during that time. I didn't even know who Uri Newton was, anything like that. And none of the other fellas. But anyway, we ended up, to fast forward a little bit, I ended up on a tier with these folks. I wish that I had been in a house with them almost, because I felt what they were doing was righteous. It wasn't anything that was wrong. But the point is this, that it was a shoot-in. Nobody got hurt. There were 9 men and there were 3 women. They were all captured and they were brought to the parish prison. And they moved me off the 5th floor and placed me on another floor, and they put those Panthers on the 5th floor. They took the ladies, the women, the 3 women, the young women, and they brought those to the house of detention. And I started communicating with these folks. They eventually put a couple of them on the tier that they had placed me on, which was C3, and we began to communicate. And they began to say things to me that rang the bell, and I began to understand exactly what was going on. They asked me, did I know anything about the Black Panthers? Did I know anything about the 10-point platform? And they began to tell me things like, we have a 10-point platform, and this is what, this is what we want. We want freedom. We want power to determine our destiny. And it dawned on me that I definitely wanted some freedom. I took all that literally. The ideology of it was okay, but I wanted some freedom. I wanted some literal freedom out of prison. So that caught my attention. But they went on to point out other things about, about the voting right. And we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. And as our major political objective, a United Nations supervised plebiscite to be held throughout the black community, in which a subject would be allowed to participate for the purpose of determining the will of black people as to their national destiny. And then he went on to say, we want an immediate end to police brutality. And look, that was something that definitely rang a bell with me, because I had been brutalized by the police during my youth years and beyond that point. So I definitely wanted some of that, And they say we want an education that teaches us the true nature of a decadent society. They want in the 10-point platform, and it was all good. And in years later, I must admit, when I began to compare this with the preamble to the Constitution, and the Constitution itself, I said, well, they just found another way to iterate the Constitution, When they say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers and so forth from the content of the government, and so forth. So, these were beautiful words, flowery words of seduction that are beautiful. But the implementation of this is another story. But the Black Panther Party was saying, well, look, you say we're supposed to have this, and we want it. And so this is what was happening. Of course, the Black Panther Party was later on demonized and made unholy. But at that time, it sort of stuck with me, and I liked that. And I think that began my awakening. That began my political awakeness. I began to see things on a much broader plane, and I began to ruminate, do a lot of thinking about this. And I felt that this was ideology, and it was a righteous doctrine, that it was implemented, that I think is something that people should aspire to and should try to change and implement these principles to make it better for everybody. And by the way, let me contradict some of you perhaps already know this. Of course, the Black Panther Party was demonized. They say that they hated, quote, all white folks, or all white folks were, quote, pigs. Nothing could be further from the truth. Disinformation, misinformation, what they did was put all this information out there to try to scare people, to make sure that people did not embrace the principles of the Black Panther Party. That didn't stop some whites from doing it. And by the way, the NCCF, which I alluded to earlier, which was the National Committee to Combat Fascism, that was an umbrella group that enroll whites. There are, I know people today who are doctors, and professors who were members of the Black Panther Party at that time, who were white. So the fact that the Panther hated all white and felt that all white was demon and so forth and so on, nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is, J. Edgar Hoover, understanding the method of the Black Panther Party, understanding that their approach to appealing to the people's need, the thing that they were not doing, could upset the apple cart. And so, hence, it was a barrage of misinformation that were put out there, and people took that under their wings. They took it to their hearts. And they separated the Black Panther Party not only from black people who fell for some of this, some black people who fell for it, but especially white people who distanced themselves away from it. They did not see it as anything good. And for that reason, the Black Panther Party was decimated. It was only set for in the morning from 66 when it was first initiated up until perhaps around 71 or 72, it was on the demise. J. Edgar Hoover had made the proclamation that the Black Panther Party was the biggest internal threat in the nation, and not because they were dangerous, not because they wanted to declare war on America, but they wanted to declare war on discrimination, racism, poverty. This is what they wanted to do. And, of course, some of you have seen pictures. At the time Ronald Reagan was governor, you may have seen Panthers exercising in Sacramento, California. That is perhaps one of the only pictures that you will see where you saw Panthers with guns, with rifles, with guns, and they marched to the capital, the state capital in Sacramento, California. Then there was a law. Ronald Reagan at the time was governor, and he decided, but in doing this, I want you to know that in exercising the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, there was something that was allegedly protected by the Constitution. But when it got to blacks, it didn't protect them because Ronald Reagan got his legislators to implement a law. And they call it, quote, the Panther Law. At time, the law was that you could walk the streets of California with a gun as long as it wasn't concealed. And everybody did it. But in Louisiana and other places, Georgia and other places, the Klans did it. The White Citizen Council did it. But they had no problem. There was no law implemented to prevent them or their carrying guns. But they did it with the Black Panther Party, and that law is in effect this day in California. But it was these things that were going on, and then I am becoming, my brain's focusing on some other stuff on a much broader plane. I'm becoming politically aware now of what is going on, and looking at all the discrepancies and noticing, and I'm making note of past discrimination and racism in which I had exhibited. It was easy for me to embrace the Black Panther Party. So again, this is why I say that I feel that 1970 was my date of birth. After being rearrested, they gave me, again, like I said, 8 years. So now with 35, I had a total of 43 years, and they shipped me to prison. We were doing a lot of things in prison. We actually, without being on the tier with members of the Black Panther Party, I came in contact with them, met them, and we exchanged letters, we exchanged mails. When I went on the yard, a few times I still get to go on the yard, we met up with individuals who were members of the Black Panther Party because they were being held on a tier known as C1. At the time, they put steel plates on their windows to keep them from communicating with anybody. However, that was taken off, and we were able to communicate with them. But what happened is we were doing a lot of things to upgrade the condition in the parish prison. We were being held in the parish prison. There was a cell that was about maybe a little bigger than the one that I stayed at in Angola, which was a 6 by 9 by 12, but this was maybe a 8 by 10 by 12. There were 4 bunks in it, and there were 4 people that was held in the cell. And sometime when the jail got overcrowded, they would put mattresses and they would add 2 more people, and there were 6 people. But there were only really 1 toilet, and a lot of times the jail was old, built back in the 30s sometime, or the 20s, and it was becoming old by this time, or it was becoming decrepit and decayed. And the sewage ran, I mean, all night, the pipes, the water pipes. There were rats, rodents beneath in the sewage. Beneath us was the sewage. Rats would come up through the sewage, and they would challenge you for your food. Serious, those were the boldest rats I've ever seen in my life. I mean that. They would challenge you for your food. If you go in a place where there are a bunch of rats, mice or something, they would scurry when you come. These rats would come scurry to you. And if they got any food, they would take it with them and go, But we, I'm serious. But we had to put up with this, and so we decided, being politically aware, that there was some things that we could do, and we did. We went on hunger strikes. We did engage in passive protesters and so forth. We engaged in many hunger strikes. We got their attention, and they sort of upgraded things. But as a result of that, they decided to move us out. By the way, the Panthers all were acquitted, all 12 of them. They was charged with attempted this and attempted that, but they went to trial and they were acquitted. Many of them went home. They went about their business. They went other places, and some of them, had other charges. They went to prison. A couple of them had other charges and went to prison. We, on the other hand, the ones, and by this time I had become a member of the Black Panther Party, but because my name, along with Herman and Albert, whom you will hear about later, their name was also, they joined the party at that time. But what happened is they decided to ship all of us out to Angola. By this time I had a sentence, and usually you would wait in parish prison perhaps 2 years waiting your appeal to process to go on. But what they did was they said, well, we're going to empty this place because there's too much militancy going on, too much radical stuff going on. So they got huge National Guard trucks, and they loaded all night. They were delivering people from Angola because they had about 700 or 800 people in the parish prison, a jail that was built for only about 250. So they began shipping all of us out to Angola. Herman and Albert was in that first bunch, and a couple of weeks later I was in that bunch. But they sent me back because I had a open charge. I think it was maybe a temp escape or whatever it was. But they sent me back to the New Orleans parish prison, where I was. They had sent me up there in November 1971, and they sent me back to the parish prison, and I was there for 6 months until April, I believe, 72. In April 72, 2 weeks prior to them taking me back, Herman and Albert, along with other members of the Black Panther Party who had went into the man prison population, they sent them into the man prison population, and they went down the walk, or what we call a walk, the big yard, and they began teaching other inmates, because there were 17-hour work period. Sugarcane was a man crop. You got 2 cents an hour. Of course, they've been raised to 4 cents an hour, but at the time it was 2 cents an hour. And you worked all night, and during sugarcane season, it did not rain, it did not storm. You had to get that cane because sugarcane was the main crop. And so Herman and Albert decided to, being members of the Black Panther Party and doing the thing that we did in the New Orleans parish prison, they decided to teach the inmates, let the inmate know that even though you're a prisoner, you have a right to protest these kind of conditions. This is slave-like condition, and you have a right to protest this. And those inmates began to hearken to them. They heard this, and guys began to engage in systematic, passive protest. And mostly they can do was going on a hunger strike. And Herman and Albert, as a result of that, became target, along with other members of the Black Panther Party, and other people who were considered militant. Even many of them were not members of the Black Panther Party, but they were placed in that category simply because they dared to resist and dared to struggle against dehumanizing condition. And Herman and Albert were marked people, and anybody else who were affiliated with the Black Panther Party was marked. 2 weeks, as I say, prior to my going back, an officer was found slain in one of the dormitories in a main prison. The first people to suspect were members of the Black Panther Party. They began to pick up all the black prisoners, all of them, and there were at least about 400 or 500 on the walk. They call it the walk. It was a dormitory that had 8 dormitories, and it was filled, but they had about 400 or 500 people on the walk, and they decided they wanted to lock everybody up. They had no evidence as to what had happened. There was blood, everywhere, according to the reports, if you read the reports. Again, they charged Herman Albert, Gilbert Montague, and another guy called Chester Jackson. They charged them with suspecting the murder, and subsequently they were indicted by St. Francisville grand jury, and they went to trial. Gilbert Montague was acquitted, of course. There was an officer, a free man. We call them free men because they were not prisoners. They had this officer testify that Gilbert was in another place. There were also people testified that Herman and Albert were other places, and all the evidence showed that they were in other places, but nevertheless, they were inmates. Herman, Albert went to trial first, and he was found guilty. And then later, Herman went to trial, and they kind of coerced Chester Jackson into giving him a sentence running in with the years that he had, that he would not have done any time. All he needed to do was implicate Herman, and he did that rightly so. Of course, records came out later that he had been a snitch for the administration on a previous dose in prison. So he had no scruples. He knew he figured that he would not get any more time, and actually he did not literally get any more time because he had 75 years for a robbery, and he pled guilty to manslaughter, which was 21 years running concurrent, meaning that you served this time same, running concurrent with the 75 years, so he wasn't going to get no time, but they wanted to convict somebody for the crime, and they used one of their snitch to do it with. However, this guy never got out of prison. What happened was he developed cancer mysteriously, and he died quick, fast and in a hurry. This Chester Jackson, he never got out of prison. But on the other hand, Herman was convicted, not along with Albert because they didn't go to trial the same, but he was convicted about 6 months after Albert, and they both were given life sentence without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. Albert's conviction rests on a former inmate guard, and I'll tell you about the inmate guards. Inmate guards at the time, Angola was considered the worst prison in the nation. Inmate ran the prison. They were the ones who were the backbone of security. They had the guns, the bat, the knife. They engaged in selling younger inmates or older convicts. They engaged in the sexual traffic of younger people. And many of them had life sentences. And if you had a life sentence, you had a life sentence without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. But nevertheless, these guys got out quickly. They were important because they were inmate guard, the backbone of security, and they were released after 7 or so years because there was a hybrid law that allowed them to be released. And many of them were released. But these inmate guards, they were vicious, and they were worse than the free people of the administration. And these inmate guards, they just, I mean, they would, if you tried to escape, they would hound, run you down, and they would be totally angry with you because if you escaped or tried to escape out of Angola, it was the inmate guard's job to run you down and to get you. And a lot of time, you know, it depends on how long it took them to get you. If it took them too long to get you, they would beat you nearly to death for having them out there in the cold, in the rain, or whatever it was, looking for you. These are the type of things that was happening. But Herman and Albert, like I say, they had a hand in kind of quelling this and stopping this. And Herman and Albert were subsequently, they were the two that were found guilty, and they were given this life without the possibility of parole or suspending the sentence. I was sent back to Angola about 2 weeks, like I said, after this had occurred. They immediately placed me in what they call CCR, or closed cell restriction. Closed cell restriction was the punishment camp at the time. Of course, since that time, they have erected other camps for punishment, but CCR was a place where if you went, you did not really want it to go, because inmate guards ran that particular place too. But they shipped me, they had sent Albert and all the people they had picked up, and they had placed many others in CCR as well. The ones who could not fit in CCR, they placed them in a cell block. But Herman and Albert were placed in CCR, and they decided they wanted to place me in CCR as well, a closed cell restriction. That means solitary confinement, because you was in a cell. It was a bath cell. You had a bunk, you had a mattress, and they give you a sheet or something like that. You had a bath toilet, and you had a table or so forth. You were locked in your cell 23 hours a day, sometimes 24. There were no yard privileges during that particular time. So they sent me there. I was classified, and I was told that the reason they classified me initially was I wanted to play lawyer for an inmate or something like that. But years later, I found out that they were keeping me in isolation because I was under investigation. And I often wonder, well, what am I being investigated for? And it was some 22 years later, I found out that they were investigating me for the death of Mr. Brent Miller, the officer who was subsequently found slain in the dormitory. They could not charge me with this crime, but they kept me in CCR, and, as I said, investigated me for 31 years, for 29 years. While they could not investigate, could not charge me with this particular crime, I was placed on a tier, B tier, and B tier, during this time, it was like 15 people on a tier, and we all got 1 hour. They would open the door at this particular time. That was the procedure. They would open the door and let everybody out, and you would do your hour. You had an hour to take a shower, if you wanted to take a shower, but they would open the door and then everybody went back in. Sometime in June in '73, I believe it was, or '74, I'm not sure, an inmate was killed in self-defense by another inmate. All the evidence shows that this inmate was actually, had killed this dude. As a matter of fact, he testified that, of course I killed him in self-defense. However, they got someone else to say that I had played a part in it, despite the fact that the officer on that morning saw me and knew that I had not done anything. In fact, he testified during the first trial that he didn't see me do anything, but he testified against a guy who admitted that he had killed in self-defense. Nevertheless, a jury believed him, and we went to trial. I could not testify in my own defense because according to the jury, there was a disruption in the court by the defendant, the guy who had actually killed the person in self-defense, because he felt he did not have enough, the lawyer that was appointed to him and us, and the lawyer was appointed to defend us jointly, but he felt that the lawyer could not adequately defend us. And he protested, you know, and as much as I did. But the judge decided that we would go to trial and we would be taped, that our mouth would be taped, that we would be shackled, and that we would be handcuffed behind our back. We sat through a jury trial that took 3 days. And each time we went to court, we sat there in that position, and we were found guilty. And of course, an appeal court overturned my conviction, but not based on the fact that I was actually innocent. They overturned my conviction based on the fact that it was a procedure error. And the procedure error was that I should be retried, but not have the tape on my mouth and not being shackled and handcuffed. And I did. I went back to trial, and they found me guilty again. However, some years later, we began to file our own writs. Someone had mentioned it earlier. The laws were changing. Clinton was president. He decided to implement hardships on prisoners, and he gave the Republican what they wanted. I think they gave him a welfare bill, and he gave them prison. The Prison Litigation Act was done. The AEDPA with the the terrorist bill, anti-death penalty deal. The AEDPA they call it. That's the acronym for it. And all of this had changed the court system. And so we began filing our own writs, and I didn't have a lawyer. We went pro se, and I began to file writs for myself and others, and we began to work with others and learn the law, through trial and error. And we got some advantage. I managed to overturn my case. That is, based on the fact that I should not have been shackled and bound and gagged. It was some years later, however, before Herman and Albert got involved in the legal process. But we felt, because the laws was changing, a law that would keep us or prevent us from going to court. An inmate at one time had, the duration of his sentence to file a habeas corpus in the federal court. But they took that away from prisoners. Prisoners has now only about a year if they Clinton was the one who implemented the law that curtailed habeas corpus for prisoners. They wanted to put an end to the endless terms of what they call litigation. And despite the fact that you may come up with some evidence later on, after 20 years, that shows that you were actually innocent of this crime, the AEDPA prevents the court from hearing your case. So that's how Clinton kind of sold everybody out in which, doing the thing in which he did. But nevertheless, what happened was we decided to file for Herman and Albert. Albert's case got overturned. We went pro se, and Albert's case got overturned. And it was from there that things began to ripen for us. The person who had implicated me in this murder of this inmate had gotten out of prison, and I think this individual had kind of got religion, as he said. He had found God, which was good, and he decided to make things straight, and he issued a declaration that I had nothing to do with it. All the records showed that I didn't have anything to do with it. After 31 years, and wrangling in court, getting my case overturned 2 times, rather 3 times, because the federal court overturned my case as well, only to have an inbound court, 17 judges overturn this particular case. The case that had given me the right to a new trial, and so that was taken from me. And some years later, again, I got it overturned again because on the fact that I had they appointed a lawyer. They felt that I had some merits, and by this time, the individual had also give a declaration that I did not have anything to do with it. and all the evidence showed that I didn't have anything to do with it. So after 31 years and 29 in solitary confinement, I went to trial in '71, and I was finally released from prison. But since that time, and that was February 8, 2001, Albert's case has been overturned. Speaking about Albert Woodfox, we became known as, quote, the Angola 3, not because we wanted this, but supporters got behind us, and they wanted us to have some support. Former members of the Black Panther Party, Malik Rahim, some of you may have heard of him. He was the individual who started Common Ground during Hurricane Katrina, and he really saved that city. But he was a former member of the Black Panther Party, and he was in the quote, the second shootout, because they had 2 shootouts in New Orleans. He heard that we were still in prison, and he got a group of people together, a group of anarchists and some other people who were activists that he knew, and they began communicating with Herman and Albert, and then later on myself, and then we got support from people who began calling us to the Angola 3, and hence this is how I was released from prison. But it wasn't until after 31 years and 29 in solitary confinement. But Herman and Albert, despite the fact that Albert's case had been overturned 3 times by a federal judge, he remained in prison, in solitary confinement, now for 42 years. You speak of or you shake your head at my 29, but now, I've been out, I got out 13 years ago. Albert, and until Herman's death about 6 months ago, by the way, he got his conviction overturned too. His conviction was, he was exonerated. The judge overturned Herman's conviction and ordered his release that same day. And Herman was released that day. However, 3 days later, you know, that old saying, justice delayed is justice denied, is ring as true as ever. 3 days later, he had been diagnosed with liver cancer, and he died. And we buried him in New Orleans. On the other hand, Albert Woodfox remained in prison now, 42 years and counting, nearly 40. April 17 will be 42 years that he remained in prison in solitary confinement, having his case overturned 3 times, twice by a federal judge. Even now, Albert's case has been overturned. He remained in prison because